Hi, welcome to Gathering Momentum. This is a place where we help you gather momentum for your life. I'm Christine Casten, and I serve as the executive director of the Warrior Commission. And I don't typically say that component first, but I just wanted to help establish something as we're talking about a topic called thriving today. And the reason it's important is because there is a exploration, if you will, that we have been on, a journey that we have been on in the Warrior Commission to try to find a structure, a culture, a developmental community that will allow people to thrive, and not only thrive in their own individual journey, but to thrive together. And one of the things that has caused me and others, we're team driven, to do is to really look at how dynamics work within groups. So when we go to conferences, when we work with different ministries or different churches or businesses or the different areas of influence, the leaders that we talk to, we look at the culture. We look at what is in the culture. And I'll give you an example that's outside of the church. I had a remodeling project that we were doing in our house, and we were working with a company that was hiring a contractor, and all those different things that happen with a remodeling project. But what was interesting is that there was a really odd dynamic that was going on, in that there was someone who apparently was very well respected for their skills, but they were not people. Okay. In other words, they were very engineering minded, and communication was just not their strong suit. And what we found in the process was that they had developed a culture in their community that protected this person and did not encourage dynamics where others could be heard. So everything was about catering to the individual, even though it wasn't necessarily the manager of the company or the leader of the company. It was this person who had a skill set that they valued and didn't want to lose. And so everything that they did in their company and their culture actually went to keeping that reverence alive for this individual. Now, again, this was not a religious group, this was a business. And what was interesting was, in those dynamics and in working with them, I realized how many ways they went about trying to protect this individual. In other words, keep them as part of the company. They were very valued for their skills. But what they didn't realize was, in the process of creating this culture that honored, in their mind, this person, or really tried to hold on to this person, it wasn't really about honor. What happened was is they were creating really bad customer service because their communication was really bad. Their rhythm of how they interacted and what they did and what the timing was of things got really off base, and so they weren't able to meet their promises. They weren't able to meet the expectations for timeline, and so things really fell apart because of this dynamic. So what had happened was, they were not able to thrive as a community because everyone was so busy trying to help this person. And so I looked at that, and as someone who does help people develop their cultures, as someone who has an awareness of, what it is to put new culture in place. We went through, in the Warrior Commission, we went through a transition from a more hierarchical structure into a team structure. We went from a top-down voice to others into a voice of everyone. Everyone has a voice, and we found ways to do that. We found ways to create that. Now, I'm not saying one structure is better or worse than another. I'm just saying, for us to find a way for people to really step into a fuller capacity of who they are, they needed to know that they had a voice, and they needed to know that they were valued. They needed to know that with voice and with value also comes a character development, a strength of character that's part of that process. There's a responsibility for what you release through your voice. There's a responsibility for what you put your hand to, for what God has for you, for stewarding your journey with God, for stewarding the commission He has in your life, both with intimacy with Him and also in what you're here to do, what your purpose is, what that looks like, how you carry that out. All of those things are necessary components for a person to be able to step into and fulfill what God has for them, the plans that God had for them, the purposes that He had for them as He was creating them. And, in Jeremiah, for I know the plans and purposes I have for you. And so for us to partner with those plans and purposes as leaders, we have to develop cultures, we have to develop ways of structure that allow people to thrive, that allow them to be able to feel safe in an environment that allows them to grow. And if we're truly an equipping culture, if we're truly a culture that's about developing people and seeing them rise to the capacity that they're capable of carrying, we have to create a culture that gives them space to do that. We can't be threatened by that as leaders, right? So what does it look like in your life to grow into a place of security, of maturity, of um, of capability to be able to create those spaces for others around you? Where in your life might God put His finger on and say, you're trying to hide the fact that you're not growing in this space, that you have immaturity in this area, and God will put His finger on it as you're ready, and as He's ready to be able to address it. And now you may not feel like you're ready to address it, but God knows that you are. And so it will come up, and it will be an opportunity to work through that. The things that we have explored in the Warrior Commission have to do with not just what is it like to train someone to be able to step into a greater capacity of who they are. We all have areas of growth. So how do we create a culture that allows for that? What does that look like? And really the word thriving has come up. The idea of what does it look like to thrive, not survive, not only survive, obviously you're going to survive, but not to be in a place where you're just about survival, but where you're actually able to thrive, to try, to create, to develop new ideas, to come up with improvements that are part of what is the norm in the group. And to do that, as to create that kind of culture as a leader, means that there are areas where God is going to put His finger on in you and say, you can't control that. You may be a leader, but you may need to step back and give space for others to thrive. And what happens is, here's the beauty of a thriving culture. At first, it's difficult because most leaders are trained to lead in a top-down hierarchical structure. So that means that the way we think has to do with tiers, and it has to do with hierarchy, and it has to do with the freedom of responsibility in each of those tiers. And what happens is that we then create a structure that becomes more about a goal of getting something done, right? So we create a machine that creates the goal instead of creating a structure that actually is about the people being able to thrive. And in the process, you'll find that goal still happens, and it actually happens better because not everyone there's not the same level of dependency on any one or two or three individuals to do things. And so what happens is there's actually an expansion of development that happens, and the thriving is what comes forward, right? People start not only being able to figure out what to do in the culture, which is what surviving is. How do I survive in this culture? How do I fit in? They move into a place of, oh my gosh, I belong here. There's something beautiful that God's doing. There's a connection and a community to the journey together, that actually creates a very productive group. But it's not productive in the sense of I'm going to use these people to see this thing happen. It actually becomes a group that has a lot of synergy, creativity rises, development, growth, expansion of ideas, being able to implement those ideas. All of those things become part of a thriving culture, and people find life in it. So if you're a leader and you're in a place where you're trying to figure out what does this look like, how do I feel a need to shift. I feel a need to bring in some different things within what we're doing, or you're starting a new group. You've got this passion, this dream in your heart that God has for you, and you're trying to figure out what does that look like for my growth, personally, but also what does that look like for how this gets put together, and how organically we steward what God's doing and expanding in and around us. Uh, please consider being a part of, reaching out to the Warrior Commission, checking out some of the videos we have on our YouTube channel, some of the things that where we talk about developing cultures, new era cultures, and what that looks like. There's a lot of creativity out there because God is a creative God, and there's a lot of different ways and different approaches that are different from the traditional. And again, there's still a place for that traditional hierarchical approach. So it's not like it's going to go out, but there are other ways to set things up and to explore and develop. So we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to learn more about growing and thriving within the Warrior Commission, please feel free to check out thewarriorcommission.com. That is our website, and you can see more about what we do in the areas of growth, and in those areas of growth, that creative process is stimulated and sparked. So I look forward to seeing you guys. Would love to see your comments, and I'll see you next week at 11 o'clock Eastern Time for the next Gathering Momentum. I'm Christine Casten, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thanks.